Colorado Territory, 1876. The mining town of Silver Ridge stood defiant against the shadow of the Rockies, a place where fortune seekers came with dreams of silver and left with empty pockets or pine box reservations. For 20-year-old Beatrice Vance, the last 3 years had turned the once bustling boomtown into a graveyard of memories. While other women had followed their husbands to more promising claims or fled back east after becoming widows, Beatrice remained, convinced that attachment only led to loss in a land that took more than it gave. The October wind cut through her navy wool dress as Beatrice made her way down the town's main street. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a practical knot, though rebellious strands escaped to frame a face too young to hold such wariness. 3 years a widow in a town where most men were either married, decrepit, or dangerous had taught her one truth. Love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Survival came first. "Mrs. Vance, your order from Denver arrived, Mr. Jenkins, the aging shopkeeper, waved her into the general store. "Thank you." Beatrice nodded politely, her gloved hands accepting the parcel of sewing supplies. The boarding house she ran kept her fed and sheltered, but only just. Every penny was accounted for, every decision calculated for survival. Attachments were liabilities in a place where winter could kill as quickly as a bullet. "Did you hear? New cattle operations setting up north of town. Might bring some stability back to these parts." Beatrice offered a noncommittal smile. Silver Ridge had seen its share of ambitious men with grand plans. The mountains eventually humbled them all. As she turned to leave, the store door swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. Framed in the doorway stood a man Beatrice had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, and far too composed for someone who'd clearly ridden hard to get here. His dark brown hat was pulled low, but not enough to hide eyes the color of summer sage. Despite the trail dust on his clothes, there was something undeniably vital about him, something that made the stale air of the mercantile suddenly feel charged. "Pardon, ma'am," he said, stepping aside to let her pass, his voice carrying the soft drawl of Texas. Beatrice nodded curtly and hurried out, unwilling to acknowledge the sudden quickening of her pulse. Men like that, young, handsome, confident, were trouble wrapped in promise. At 26, he couldn't be much older than she was, but the difference was stark. His youth hadn't been stolen by the frontier's cruel math of survival. Behind her, she heard the stranger introduce himself. "Name's Knox Quinn, looking for supplies and information about property north of town." Another dreamer, Beatrice thought. The mountains would teach him the same lesson they taught her late husband. The West gave nothing freely and took everything it could. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that teased of winter's approach. Beatrice was sweeping the porch of her boarding house when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Knox Quinn rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, his posture easy in the saddle like he'd been born there. "Mrs. Vance," he called, stopping at her gate. "I was told you might have a room available." Beatrice straightened, gripping the broom handle like a shield. "I do, Mr. Quinn. $5 a week, meals included. No liquor, no women, no gunplay." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, ma'am, just need a place while I get my operation running." "The cattle ranch Mr. Jenkins mentioned." "Yes." "Bought the old Peterson place." Knox dismounted, his movements fluid and deliberate. Up close, she could see that his face was clean-shaven save for the slightest shadow along his jaw, and his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "That land's been abandoned 3 years, Beatrice said. "Nothing but wolves and ghost stories up there now." "I'm not much bothered by either." He extended his hand. "I appreciate the room, Mrs. Vance." His grip was firm and warm against her gloved fingers. For a moment, Beatrice felt an unsettling awareness of how long it had been since she'd touched another person with anything beyond the most cursory contact. "Dinner's at 6, she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. "You can bring your things around back." As she watched him lead his horse away, a treacherous thought slipped through her carefully constructed defenses. What would it be like to have someone so vibrant and purposeful around? She quickly dismissed it. Ranchers came and went like the seasons. In the harsh reality of the Colorado mountains, dreams froze faster than water. "It's suicide trying to run cattle at that elevation," Marshall Wilson declared that evening at the dinner table. The aging lawman had been boarding with Beatrice for 2 years, along with the town doctor and schoolteacher. "Peterson lost everything in '73. Knox cut into his beefsteak with practiced ease. "Peterson didn't have my breeding stock or my experience. Texas Longhorns are hardy, but they're not made for these mountains. I've got Durham Shorthorns crossed with Highland cattle from Scotland. They'll thrive where others failed. Dr. Miller nodded appreciatively. Innovative thinking. This town could use more of that. And what brought you all the way from Texas, Mr. Quinn? Beatrice asked, surprising herself with her curiosity. Knox met her eyes across the table. War took my family's ranch. Spent the last 8 years working other men's land, saving every dollar. When I heard about cheap mountain property, I figured it was my chance to build something of my own. His words resonated uncomfortably with Beatrice. She too had come west with dreams, following her husband Thomas to the Silver Strike, imagining a fine house and children. Instead, she'd gotten a funeral and a boarding house filled with other people's lives while her own remained suspended. "Well, I wish you luck, young man," the schoolteacher, Miss Pearson, said with the wistful tone of someone who'd seen too many ambitions crumble, "though winter comes early up here." "That it does," Beatrice agreed, rising to clear the plates. "And it stays late." Later, as she washed dishes in the kitchen, Knox appeared with his plate and cup. "Let me help," he offered, rolling up his sleeves. "That's not necessary, Mr. Quinn. My mother would have my hide if I didn't offer." He picked up a towel. "Besides, I've been fending for myself too long to stand on ceremony." Reluctantly, Beatrice allowed him to dry while she washed. They worked in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "I notice there aren't many women in town." Beatrice's hands stilled momentarily in the soapy water. Silver's played out. Men follow the strikes. Women follow the men or leave when they're widowed. "But you stayed." It wasn't a question, but Beatrice answered anyway. "This is my home now. I've put down what roots I have." Knox nodded, carefully drying a plate. "Roots matter. My father always said a man without land is just passing through life. And a woman without a husband out here is just one misfortune away from destitution," Beatrice replied, the words escaping before she could reconsider them. Knox studied her profile. "Is that what you believe, Mrs. Vance, that we're all just one bad turn from losing everything?" Beatrice turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they stood in the small kitchen. "Mr. Quinn, I've buried a husband and watched a town die around me. Experience is a thorough teacher. Experience can also narrow vision." His voice was gentle, not challenging. "Sometimes what looks like an ending is just a poor vantage point." Before Beatrice could respond, the back door burst open and Marshal Wilson stumbled in, his face grim. "Got trouble brewing," he announced. "Carver boys are in town, liquored up and looking to cause a ruckus." Knox set down the towel. "The Carvers." "Local miscreants," Beatrice explained. "They fancy themselves outlaws, but they're mostly just bullies." "They're dangerous bullies," the marshal corrected. "And they've gotten bolder since the mine closed. Word is they've been asking about you, Quinn." Knox's expression hardened. "Any particular reason?" "New blood always interests them. Especially someone buying property they've likely been poaching from." "I should go with you," Knox offered. The marshal shook his head. "No need to make yourself a target tonight. Just be careful when you head back to your property tomorrow." After the marshal left, Beatrice found herself unexpectedly anxious. "Perhaps you should delay your return to the ranch." Knox smiled, a slow, confident curve of his lips. "Mrs. Vance, are you concerned for my welfare?" "I'm concerned for all my boarders," she replied stiffly. "Bad business to have them shot." "I appreciate the sentiment, whatever its source." He hung the towel neatly. "But I've dealt with men like the Carvers before. They're coyotes, they only hunt what runs." As he bid her good night, Beatrice was left with the unsettling realization that for the first time in 3 years, someone else's welfare had breached her carefully constructed wall of detachment. The following week brought unseasonable warmth, a false reprieve before winter's inevitable arrival. Beatrice found herself watching the road north from town as she hung laundry, wondering how Knox was faring at the old Peterson place. She told herself it was merely neighborly concern, the same she would feel for any resident attempting to revive a failed homestead. Her routine was interrupted mid-morning when Knox's chestnut came galloping into town riderless, a worrying streak of blood on the saddle. Marshal Wilson was organizing a search party when Beatrice approached, her heart beating unnaturally fast. I'm coming with you, she stated, brooking no argument. Mrs. Vance, this could be dangerous. I know these mountains as well as anyone, she interrupted, and I'm bringing medical supplies. An hour later, they found Knox in a ravine, conscious but badly injured. A bullet had grazed his temple, and his left arm hung at an awkward angle. Carvers, he managed through gritted teeth as Dr. Miller examined him, ambushed me near the north pasture. Beatrice knelt beside him, pressing a clean cloth to his bleeding head. Hold still, she instructed, her voice steadier than her hands. Didn't expect to see you out here, Mrs. Vance. Despite his pain, Knox's eyes held a warmth that made Beatrice look away. You're my boarder. It's bad business to lose the rent. The ghost of a smile touched his lips before pain eclipsed it. The ride back to town was slow and difficult, with Knox barely staying in the saddle despite the marshal's support. By the time they reached Beatrice's boarding house, his face was ashen. He needs bed rest, Dr. Miller declared after setting the arm and stitching the head wound. Mrs. Vance, can you manage? Of course, she replied, though the prospect of nursing Knox unsettled her in ways she couldn't articulate. That night, fever set in. Beatrice sat by Knox's bedside, replacing cool compresses on his forehead as he drifted between consciousness and delirium. In his fevered state, he spoke of Texas, of cattle drives and starlit nights, of a family lost to violence and a dream that wouldn't die. Land's in the blood, he murmured, his good hand suddenly grasping hers with surprising strength. Can't let them take it, not again. No one's taking anything, Beatrice assured him, her throat unexpectedly tight. Rest now. His fingers loosened around hers, but she didn't immediately withdraw her hand. Something about his vulnerability pierced the armor she'd built around herself. Here was a man who understood loss, who had rebuilt from ashes as she had, yet somehow maintained a belief in possibilities that she had long since abandoned. By morning, the fever broke. Knox opened his eyes to find Beatrice dozing in the chair beside him, her head at an uncomfortable angle. For a moment, he simply watched her, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way the early light caught the gold in her hair. You stayed, he said softly. Beatrice startled awake. You were feverish. It was necessary. Thank you. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her look away. The marshal is organizing men to investigate your property, she said, standing to straighten her skirts. The Carvers won't get away with this. I didn't think you believed in justice out here, Mrs. Vance. Beatrice poured water from a pitcher. I believe in community. Silver Ridge may be diminished, but we still protect our own. Am I one of your own then? The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the words themselves. Before she could answer, Dr. Miller arrived to check on his patient, giving Beatrice a reason to retreat to the kitchen and the familiar safety of practical tasks. Over the next 2 weeks, Knox recovered under Beatrice's reluctant but thorough care. Despite her best efforts to maintain distance, their conversations stretched longer each day. She found herself sharing stories of her journey west, of Thomas and their dreams, of the devastating cave-in that had claimed him along with 20 others. I sometimes think the town died with them, she confessed one evening as she changed his bandages. Everything since has just been a slow burial. Yet you stayed, Knox observed. That takes a special kind of courage. Or fear, Beatrice countered. Sometimes staying is easier than facing the unknown. Knox's good hand caught hers as she finished with the bandage. Is that what you believe? That you stayed out of fear? The warmth of his touch sent an unwelcome current through her. I stayed because this is what I know. The world beyond these mountains holds nothing for me. I don't believe that, Knox said simply. A woman with your strength and intelligence could make a place anywhere. You don't know me, Mr. Quinn. I know more than you think, Beatrice. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it startled her. I know you run this house with precision and care. I know you remember how everyone takes their coffee and which floorboards creak. I know you still wear your wedding ring but touch it less each day. Beatrice withdrew her hand sharply. You presume too much. Perhaps, he agreed, unrepentant. But presumption is sometimes necessary when someone has walled themselves away from possibility. His words followed her like shadows as she went about her duties. Was that what she had done, built walls not just against pain, but against any future that might include connection? The answer came unexpectedly the following Sunday when she attended church services. Pastor Mills was speaking about faith when the doors at the back of the small church opened. Knox stood there, still pale but standing straight, his injured arm in a sling but determination evident in his stance. Something shifted in Beatrice's chest at the sight of him, not the startled flutter of attraction she'd been fighting, but a deeper recognition. He had been shot, nearly killed defending his dream, yet here he stood, refusing to concede defeat. While she had been surviving, he had been living. After the service, Knox approached her. "I'm heading back to my property tomorrow." "Doctor." "Miller says you need another week of recovery," Beatrice protested. "The Carvers will take my absence as weakness." His voice was firm. "I need to secure what's mine." "And if they return?" "Then I'll deal with them." The steel in his voice reminded her that beneath his courteous manner was a man forged in post-war Texas, no stranger to conflict. "At least let someone accompany you," she insisted. "The marshal's lending me a deputy for a few days." Knox studied her face. "I'll miss your cooking, Mrs. Vance." "I expect you to return for Sunday dinners," she found herself saying. "To report on your progress." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can manage that." True to his word, Knox returned the following Sunday, and the one after that. Each visit brought news of his rebuilding efforts: fences mended, cattle settled, a roof repaired. Beatrice listened with growing interest, occasionally offering practical suggestions that Knox received with genuine appreciation. As October gave way to November, Beatrice found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both alarmed and exhilarated her. When the first snow fell in early December, she worried until he appeared at her door, his coat dusted white, bearing a gift of venison from a successful hunt. "You shouldn't have risked the journey," she scolded, even as she accepted the meat. "It's only 3 miles, Knox replied, stomping snow from his boots. "Besides, I gave my word." That evening, as they sat around the dining table, Miss Pearson made an observation that caused Beatrice's cheeks to warm. "Mr. Quinn, you've brought life back to this house. Mrs. Vance smiles more often these days." "Beatrice has a lovely smile," Knox agreed, his eyes finding hers across the table. "It deserves regular exercise." Later, as she walked him to the door, Knox hesitated. "There's a Christmas social at the church next weekend. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that Beatrice wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. "As friends, you mean?" Knox's expression grew serious. "Beatrice, I think we both know there's more than friendship between us. At least, there could be." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Quinn." "Knox," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think you might use my given name." "Knox," she amended, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "I'm not sure what you're asking of me." "Just a dance," he said, though his eyes suggested he hoped for more. "For now." The social hall was decorated with pine boughs and candles, the air fragrant with spices and wood smoke. Beatrice had spent more time than she cared to admit preparing for the evening, finally selecting a dress of deep green wool that she hadn't worn since before Thomas died. The color brought out the amber flecks in her eyes, a detail she told herself didn't matter even as she secured a mother-of-pearl comb in her upswept hair. Knox's expression when he saw her made the effort worthwhile. He stood straighter, his eyes widening in appreciation that required no words. For the first time in years, Beatrice felt truly seen, not as a widow, not as a proprietress, but as a woman still in the bloom of her youth. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The evening passed in a whirl of music, laughter, and conversation. Knox proved to be an excellent dancer despite his healing arm, guiding Beatrice through waltzes and reels with confident ease. The townspeople watched with knowing smiles and whispered comments that Beatrice pretended not to notice. It was during a quiet moment, as they stepped outside for air beneath a sky brilliant with stars, that everything changed. "I've been thinking about something you said," Knox began, his breath forming clouds in the cold night air. "About staying being easier than facing the unknown." Beatrice tensed, sensing a shift in the comfortable rapport they'd established. "And I think you're half right," his voice was thoughtful. "Staying is easier, but only when you're staying for the wrong reasons. Fear, habit, resignation, those make any place a prison." "And the right reasons?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible over the muffled sounds of music from inside. Knox turned to face her, his expression earnest in the starlight. Love, purpose, hope. When you stay for those reasons, it's not hiding, it's building. The word love hung between them, charged and dangerous. Beatrice looked away, toward the dark silhouette of the mountains. I built a life here once. When it crumbled, I learned to be cautious with my expectations. Cautious is prudent, Knox agreed. Closed is something else entirely. He stepped closer, his hand gently turning her face back toward his. Beatrice, I came to Colorado looking for land, for a place to build my future. I didn't expect to find someone who makes me think that future could be so much more than cattle and crops. Her heart stuttered. Knox, I'm not sure I can be what you want. I'm not asking for certainty, he said softly, just possibility, just a chance to show you that love isn't something the mountains can take away. Before she could respond, a shout from the direction of the church interrupted them. Marshal Wilson was calling Knox's name, his voice urgent. Ryder just came in, the marshal explained as they hurried over. Your ranch is burning, Quinn. Carvers were seen heading that way earlier. The warmth of the evening evaporated instantly. Knox's face hardened into lines of fury and determination. I need to go now. I'll gather men, the marshal assured him. Meet at the livery in 10 minutes. Beatrice gripped Knox's arm. You can't go alone. Wait for the others. Every minute means more damage. His eyes met hers, apologetic but resolute. I have to go. Before she could protest further, he pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her lips, their first, then strode rapidly toward the livery, leaving Beatrice with the ghost of his touch and a fear she'd thought herself incapable of feeling again. The night passed in agonizing slowness. Beatrice paced her kitchen until dawn, jumping at every sound, praying for hoofbeats that didn't come. By morning, she could bear it no longer, borrowing a horse from Dr. Miller. She set out for the Peterson place, her stomach knotted with dread. The scene that greeted her was one of devastation. The barn had burned to the ground, and smoke still rose from the charred remains of the corral. The house stood intact but showed signs of gunfire, splintered door frames and broken windows. No sign of Knox. As Beatrice approached, her heart in her throat, a figure emerged from behind the house, not Knox but Deputy Evans, his face grim. Mrs. Vance, you shouldn't be here, he warned. Where is he? Beatrice demanded, dismounting with such haste she nearly fell. The deputy's expression told her everything before he spoke. Carvers took him, ma'am. Ambushed the marshal's posse about a mile from here. Quinn was shot, but they dragged him off. The world tilted beneath her feet. Is he alive? Last we saw, but wounded bad. Marshals tracking them with the other men. Beatrice stared at the smoldering ruins of Knox's dreams, a terrible clarity dawning. This was why she had closed herself off, why attachment was dangerous in a land where violence was as common as weather. Love was a luxury the frontier punished swiftly and without mercy. Yet even as these thoughts crystallized, another voice rose within her, Knox's voice, speaking of courage and possibility, of building rather than hiding. Where were they headed? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. North, toward Devil's Gulch, but Mrs. Vance, you can't possibly. Do you know the old mining trail that cuts above the gulch? Beatrice interrupted. The one the Ute used before the silver strike. Deputy Evans frowned, vaguely. It's treacherous this time of year. But faster than following the creek bed, Beatrice was already remounting. If the Carvers are taking the main trail, we could intercept them. Mrs. Vance, this is no job for a woman. I know these mountains better than you do, Deputy, she retorted, and I know what's at stake. She gathered the reins. Are you coming or not? Devil's Gulch lived up to its name, a jagged slash in the mountainside where winter shadows never fully retreated. Beatrice led the reluctant deputy along a narrow trail that skirted its upper edge, her eyes constantly scanning the creek bed below for any sign of movement. They had ridden for nearly an hour when Beatrice spotted them, 4 riders moving slowly along the water's edge, one slumped ominously in the saddle. There, she whispered, pointing. Deputy Evans squinted. That's them all right, 5 of them plus Quinn. We need to get ahead of them, Beatrice decided. There's a place where the trail descends just around that bend. If we hurry, we can cut them off. The deputy looked dubious. And then what? There's just 2 of us. Then we do what's necessary, Beatrice replied, a cold determination settling over her. She had already lost 1 man to these mountains. She would not lose another without a fight. They positioned themselves at a narrow point where massive boulders on either side created a natural bottleneck. The deputy concealed himself behind one with his rifle ready, while Beatrice waited on horseback, her heart pounding but her hands steady. When the carvers rounded the bend, Beatrice straightened in her saddle. "That's far enough." The riders pulled up short, clearly startled by her appearance. The largest man, whom Beatrice recognized as Jade Carver, sneered when he saw her. "Well, looky here, boys, Quinn's woman's come to beg for his life. I've come to inform you that Marshal Wilson and his men are right behind me," Beatrice lied smoothly. "You're surrounded." Jade laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Nice try, lady. We ambushed the marshal 10 miles back. Ain't nobody coming to help you or your cattle man." "You sure about that?" Deputy Evans called, revealing his position with his rifle aimed squarely at Jade. The carvers tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Beatrice's gaze found Knox, still slumped but conscious, blood staining his shirt. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw both pain and warning in his expression. "You're outnumbered," Jade growled. "One deputy against 5 of us ain't good odds." "3," a new voice corrected as Marshal Wilson and 2 armed men appeared on the trail behind the carvers. "Throw down your weapons, Jade." "It's over." What followed was a blur of shouting and sudden violence. 2 of the Carver boys surrendered immediately, but Jade and another made a desperate play, guns drawn with frightening speed. Shots echoed through the gulch. Beatrice saw Knox somehow find the strength to throw himself sideways off his horse, dragging one of the carvers with him. When the chaos cleared, Jade Carver lay dead and his remaining brother wounded. Knox was on the ground, motionless, and Beatrice was off her horse and running to him before she consciously decided to move. "Knox," she fell to her knees beside him, terrified by the fresh blood soaking through his shirt. "No, no, please." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Beatrice, what are you doing here?" "Saving you, apparently," she replied, tears threatening despite her attempt at bravado. "Though you're making it extraordinarily difficult." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never did take the easy path." He winced, his face contorting in pain. "You shouldn't have risked yourself." "And you shouldn't have kissed me and then ridden off to get yourself shot," she retorted, carefully examining his wound. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, bleeding freely but not immediately fatal. "Fair point," Knox conceded weakly. "Though if I'm going to die, that kiss was worth it." "You're not dying," Beatrice said firmly, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. "I refuse to allow it." His hand found hers, bloody but warm. "Is that right?" "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Because you were right, Knox. I've been hiding, not staying, and I'm not ready to hide anymore." The journey back to town was slow and arduous. Knox drifted in and out of consciousness, kept in the saddle only by Marshal Wilson's support. Beatrice rode beside them, refusing to let Knox out of her sight until they reached Dr. Miller's surgery. The doctor's prognosis was guardedly optimistic. "He's lost blood and the wound's infected, but he's strong. With proper care, he should recover." "I'll provide the care," Beatrice stated, brooking no argument. "He'll stay at my boarding house." The next days passed in a haze of anxiety and hope. Beatrice barely left Knox's bedside, monitoring his fever, changing bandages, and spooning broth between his cracked lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. When delirium took him, she held his hand through the worst of it, speaking softly of spring planting and future harvests, of rebuilding what the carvers had destroyed. On the 3rd night, when his fever finally broke, Beatrice found herself weeping with relief. Knox opened his eyes to find her with tears streaming down her face, her hand clutched tightly around his. "Don't cry," he murmured, his voice hoarse but clear. "I'm too stubborn to die." Beatrice laughed through her tears. "So I've noticed. Though you seemed determined to test the theory." Knox's fingers tightened around hers. "Thank you. Evans told me what you did. Coming after me like that was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever heard." "Perhaps both," Beatrice admitted, "but I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The words hung in the air between them, naked in their honesty. Knox's eyes never left her face. "Does that mean what I hope it means?" he asked softly. Beatrice took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. "It means I'm tired of surviving instead of living. It means that somehow, without my permission, you've become important to me." Just important, his smile was teasing despite his weakness. Essential, she amended, her heart racing. Frightfully, wonderfully essential. Knox raised his hand to touch her cheek. I love you, Beatrice Vance. I think I have since that first day in the general store when you looked at me like I was just another fool chasing silver dreams. You're definitely a fool, she replied, leaning into his touch. But your dreams aren't of silver. No, he agreed, my dreams are of you, of us, building something together that neither of us could create alone. The winter that followed was one of healing and preparation. As Knox regained his strength, plans were made. The townspeople, galvanized by the confrontation with the Carvers and inspired by Knox's determination, rallied to help rebuild his barn and replenish his herd. What had been one man's isolated venture became a community's investment in its own future. Beatrice found herself at the center of this renewal, coordinating work parties, organizing supplies, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, transferring the management of her boarding house to Miss Pearson, who had long expressed interest in taking it over. By early spring, when the last patches of snow still clung to the shadowed hollows of the mountains, Knox stood with Beatrice on the porch of his newly completed ranch house. The building was solid and practical, with large windows that captured the morning light and a stone fireplace that promised warmth through the harshest winters. What do you think? He asked, his arm around her waist. Will it do? Beatrice leaned against him, surveying the corrals where new calves frolicked on spindly legs and the distant fields where green was beginning to reclaim the blackened earth where the carver's fire had raged. It's perfect, she said simply. It feels like home. Knox supplied when she hesitated. Yes, Beatrice turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers, though not because of the house. Knox's smile was radiant as he drew her close. I was hoping you'd say that, because I have something to ask you, Beatrice Vance. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. This belonged to my mother. My father gave it to her when they claimed their first piece of land in Texas. His eyes, serious and full of love, held hers. I'm offering you the same, not just a ring, but a share in everything I have and everything I hope to build. Beatrice felt tears welling as he continued. I know you've been hurt by this land before. I know loving means risking loss. But I believe with all my heart that what we can create together is worth that risk. Knox, Beatrice whispered, her voice catching. Marry me, he said simply. Be my wife, my partner, my heart's home. In answer, Beatrice reached up and kissed him, pouring into the embrace all the words she couldn't yet speak, her fears, her hopes, her love that had grown from cautious ember to consuming flame. When they finally parted, both breathless, she smiled up at him. Yes, she said, to all of it. They were married in the small church in Silver Ridge, as April showers gave way to May sunshine. The town turned out in full force, the ceremony becoming a celebration not just of two lives joined, but of a community reborn. As they spoke their vows, Beatrice felt the last walls around her heart dissolve completely. The frontier remained harsh and unpredictable, but she understood now what Knox had been trying to tell her, that love wasn't a luxury to be sacrificed for survival, but the very thing that made survival meaningful. Later, as they danced under lantern light to the music of fiddles and laughter, Knox pulled her close. Happy, Mrs. Quinn. Extraordinarily, she replied, the new name feeling right on her lips. Though I must confess something. What's that? When you first rode into town, I gave you 6 months before the mountains drove you away. Her smile was self-deprecating. I've never been happier to be wrong. Knox laughed, spinning her in a circle before drawing her back against his chest. The mountains aren't what kept me here. As the music slowed, Beatrice rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Around them, Silver Ridge celebrated, children darted between dancing couples, and plans were being made for new businesses to serve the growing cattle operation. You know what they're saying in town, Knox murmured against her hair. What's that? That you were the only wife left in town until I showed up. His arms tightened around her. But I think it's the other way around. You showed me what love really means, that it's not just passion or promise, but choice. Every day, choosing each other over fear. Beatrice lifted her face to his, the joy in her heart reflected in his eyes. Then let's keep choosing, Mr. Quinn. Today and all the days to come. As they sealed this pledge with a kiss, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the path ahead, however steep, however challenging, would be traveled together, two hearts finding in each other the courage to build a future where once there had been only survival. In the shadow of mountains that had taken so much from her, Beatrice had found not just a husband but a reason to believe again. And in a land where permanence was never guaranteed, that belief was perhaps the greatest gift of all.